So welcome to the channel, and in this new playlist we're going to be having a look at another great British classic, the Triumph TR6. In this episode on the playlist we're going to be having a look at the throttle bodies and how to tune the fuel injection system. So in this episode we're going to have a look at the PI throttle body system. The system itself is not that complex, but it can be very difficult to set up. The design doesn't lend itself to easy setup, but if you follow a basic set of principles and understand what's happening with the throttle bodies, it's not that difficult to diagnose, set up the airflow and get your engine running really well. Let me explain. The petrol injection throttle body system consists of three throttle bodies, each with two butterfly valves. It houses the injector units and they're interconnected with balance tubes. So on the early models, that tends to be 2 tubes. On the later models, that tends to be the 4 tubes, 2 at the front and 2 at the back. The idle is set via a tube off the manifold that bypasses the throttle discs and can be adjusted via this adjusting screw here. So to set the idle, what that relies on is each of the 6 throttle discs being effectively closed in their bores so that you're controlling the airflow through this bypass here. And therein lies the problem. The TR6 has 6 throttle discs, each of them being around 35-40 millimeters in diameter. To put that into perspective, a modern 1600 or 2 litre car will typically have 1 40 millimeter disc in a throttle body controlling the airflow to the entire engine. Indeed, even a Rover V8 engine that goes into a Range Rover typically only has a 10 centimetre or 100 millimeter disc controlling the airflow to the entire engine. So to put that into perspective, we've got 6 40 millimeter discs. That airflow is massive going into this engine, potentially when full throttle. The challenge therefore is minimizing that airflow down to its lowest possible level in order to get an idle. One of the criticisms of these cars is often that the idle tends to creep up and it's difficult to maintain a low idle. So first thing we need to do is have a look for leaks. The reality is though that there's very few places that we can get air leaks. We can get air leaks on the manifold here and we can check the tightness of these nuts here and the condition of the gasket, of course. We can check the O-rings on the injectors, make sure we're not getting any air leaks through here. But typically you'll find that that's sound. We can check these balance pipes here, make sure there's no air leaks across here. But once we've done that, that draws us to the conclusion that what we're doing is getting air bypassing the discs in the idle condition. The challenge with the PI setup is that by its inherent design, there's very little force pulling the butterfly valves closed. We've got a small spring on the end on this side, and we've got a small spring on the end of this side, together with the throttle return springs that we have underneath here. What we find then is setting all 6 discs so that they're opening in parallel to give us balanced airflow can be a real challenge when we only have one point applying rotation to the discs. As we apply the accelerator pedal, this lever moves and moves in a downward position, and this screw here is what then mates with this lever onto the next throttle body. So setting this screw so that these 2 throttle bodies open at exactly the same time is absolutely paramount. Once we've got that done, we then move and we have to set this screw so that we open the final throttle body at exactly the same time. The reality is, once we set the throttle bodies to closed, these screws have to only just kiss that lever in order to get a situation where they're opening all together. The challenge then is getting them to all close and close to a fully closed state so that we minimize the airflow and therefore get the idle to a sensible position. As we've already said, the spring force is fairly low. So what I've done on this particular car is take the levers at the end. I tried initially doing an extra wind on the spring to get more force on the closing, but unfortunately the spring can't be wound on an extra wind. So what I've done is taken the end lever off, rotate it through 90 degrees and tighten it back on. So this spring has had an extra half wind giving more closing force to the throttle discs. I've then done exactly the same on the other end. So taken this lever through 180 degrees, sorry, in order to give an extra half wind on the spring, therefore giving more closing force. You can see at the back of the throttle bodies, what I've done is attached a spring, and I believe this is an MG throttle return spring, to the back of the main driving lever, and then connected that to the supporting bracket for the airflow chamber. What this does is give extra spring return force to the primary throttle body. So with the extra spring force, that may allow you now to set the adjustment screws with the aid of a carburetor balancing tool such as this, by running the engine and then placing it over each pair of throttle bodies to make sure that the ball rises equally across all three of the throttle bodies, and therefore having a balanced condition. So the goal here is to set the engine to its standard idle speed, which is around 700 to 800 RPM, and get to a place where, by completely closing the idle screw, we can virtually stall the engine. If you're still struggling to set the PI throttle body system, even though you've made the adjustments, you've checked for leaks, you're still struggling to get the idle down or get a good balance condition, there is another fix that you can try, which has been applied with this engine. With the throttle bodies removed from the car so that there's no load onto the butterflies and the spindles, one of the things you can do is close the throttle discs, make sure they're fully closed, and apply a graphite substance such as Molykote 321R around the edge of the bore. What this does is seal the edge of the bore, and the principle is that because now you have a better seal, to get the right level of airflow, you need to move the butterfly disc more open and therefore more within the range of operation of the adjustment mechanisms and the levers in order to get a better setting. Though counterintuitive, this is actual common practice within the automotive world. And in fact, if you look at most cars that you'll be familiar with, such as the MX-5 and other Japanese cars, this is a typical process designed to replicate the dirt and soot build-up that often throttle bodies experience through the life of running. It's for this reason that when we take our throttle bodies apart and the first thing we do is clean them to get them as clean as possible, actually we can be making the condition worse, because what we're doing is getting rid of all that soot that builds up between the disc and the bore, and therefore allowing more airflow to go past those big throttles. So let's take our manifold off and have a look at what the butterfly valves are doing. So here, as we look down the bores, you can see the Molykote spray that's been sprayed down the bores in order to replicate that soot buildup that is fairly typical with the car over time. And what that does is seal around the bore to make sure you've got a better chance of adjusting the airflow. So what we'll do now is start this car up, and then we'll use our balance meter to check what the airflow is doing across each of the three throttle bodies. So remember, this throttle body at the front of the engine is the master, as that's being driven by the accelerator lever. So if we put that on first, we can see that that's going halfway up our vacuum gauge. See if we can get a feel there. There we go. That's going halfway up. As we move along to the next throttle body, we can see that we're running tiny bit low on there. So what we're going to do is adjust the throttle just slightly to give more airflow there. So one of the improvements worth mentioning at this stage is the aftermarket single throttle linkage mechanism that can be purchased. What this does is use one single link bar connected to the throttle cable, and then has three separate adjustment linkages down to each of the throttle bodies, therefore eliminating the reliance on balancing one throttle body through the balance lever against the next. This is supposed to make adjusting the throttles much easier. However, it can still be achieved with a standard setup. So we've now got to a point where when we put the balancer on, we can see now that it goes up to halfway on all three of the throttle bodies. So we've got the throttle bodies in a balanced condition now. All we need to do now is make sure that we can adjust the idle, get it down to what we want. So a quick check of that. That's running at about 600, so that's a little bit light, so if we adjust back up again. That's perfect at around 750 RPM. So now we've done that, we can reassemble the manifold, reconnect the pipework and go for a test run. Once again, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please do subscribe. Please do like the video. Please do comment. Love reading the comments and replying and getting involved with you all. Until next time.